Okay, I'll just say this from the beginning. Banana fish is a stupid name. I don't care if it's a reference to Salinger or whatnot. Calling your work banana fish is like naming your child Dick. There's ultimately nothing wrong with the name, it's just that school bullies will be especially grateful. Don't have to get creative with insults. And on that note, Banana Fish is a very critically acclaimed criminal drama made by Mappa. It tells us a story about Ash Lynx, a talented 17-year-old boss of a large street gang, and Eiji Okumura, You know, now that I think about it, it's not actually that easy to describe what Eiji is. Ash is like an open map. He's a gang leader who was a sex slave for the dawn of an influential Corsican family since age 8 to 9, who was training him to become his heir. Simple enough. Eiji, on the other hand, is practically unknown to the viewer. He was a pole jumper in Japan and has come to US to photograph gangs, and then he befriends Ash, and then they both decide to investigate a drug named Banana Fish, which is like LSD, only permanently mind breaks you just like in those hentais, and that's roughly the entirety of the plot. I'll return to it in a moment. The graphics, for the most part, are, for a lack of a better term, tolerable. It's not that bad, especially in motion, but it has a nasty habit of using simple animation loops for an unnecessary long time, and occasionally the faces have a tendency of turning into goblins for a couple of seconds. Not something that will kill the mood or anything, but very noticeable in still images. The music, outside of openings and endings, consists of roughly 3-4 repetitive tunes, but it's actually a very good choice for this sort of story, and the way they use it to set the mood is some of the most creative things to come from this industry this season. Unfortunately, on a technical level, this is a fairly decent anime. The story is what will define whether you like it or hate it. I suppose there's no beating around the bush. This story features a lot of homosexuality, pedophilia, or a combination of both. Almost all villains here are either gay or somehow involved in child trafficking. Ash was a sex slave since age 10, and a big chunk of the outside plot revolves around a conspiracy about a mind control drug. The biggest problem with this all is that sometimes the homosexual aspect of the story may seem a bit too overabundant for the average viewer, because after watching it, it's not that hard to gain an impression that you won't become a part of Corsican Mafia unless you're gay, and it wouldn't be that bad, but for a story that goes out of its way to be as realistic as humanly possible, it's pretty jarring to center such plot around boys' prostitution, yet forgetting to even briefly mention any girls. The way this anime tackles realism is also peculiar. You have an anime that's accurate enough to make one of the characters be part of a failed Crimea takeover, but for some reason all villains are gay child molesters. Barring the last episodes, women's role in this story was to be killed in a brutal manner, and for some reason they just can't write Afghanistan to save their lives. Well, I do know the reason. A lot of these are actually new additions to the story to make it seem relevant. Thus, Iraq War is Vietnam War in the manga, and Afghanistan and Maliban was Latin America. Thankfully, though some people might think that Ash and Eiji are gay as a result, their relationship has nothing sexual in it whatsoever, and they feel more like very close friends than outright in love with each other, which is a good thing. A lot of these sorts of stories are ruined once sex is introduced, and having just two characters using each other for emotional support is something not a lot of modern media does these days. But you may be forgiven to treat Ash like a Mary Sue sometimes, because the dude is a damn Terminator with 200 IQ and perfection in everything he does. In fact, now that I think about it, Eiji's entire role in the plot is to provide him with a relatable weakness others can target. That's how indestructible he is. And finally, the biggest problem of this story is that it's very, very, very dense, to the point where I genuinely recommend people listening to watch this anime in moderation, 5 to 6 episodes daily, otherwise the show stops being entertaining and starts being obnoxiously tedious, like an assignment on your most hated subject. Here's why. Instead of making the story go in arcs like a typical anime, here the story is made out of subplots, and each of those subplots go parallel to each other, ending and branching in their own pace. This makes it very hard to follow it for long periods of time, and since there's 24 episodes to sit through, I felt physically tired by the show by the 10th episode. But though I had my gripes with it, overall I can't say I was disappointed in the show. It's a decent action movie and possibly the closest thing currently to my ideal manga adaptation, and if you don't mind the homosexual stuff and watch it in moderation, it's a good time waster if anything. But if you don't really like this sort of thing and prefer your action movies to be less complex, then skip it. It's just a very obnoxious mix of Clockwork Orange with City of Gold if it was written by Tom Clancy.